Welcome to the latest episode of the Alternative Litigation Strategies podcast, where I interview esteemed members of the bar on some of the most cutting-edge issues affecting the practice of law and the legal marketplace. I'm your host, Kevin Skrzysowski, a director with the litigation consulting firm Certain Group, where we work with companies and their counsel to mitigate cap and transfer outcome risk and a wide array of litigation through our suite of litigation funding and insurance products. And today I am pleased to be joined by someone who is perhaps one of our most dynamic guests with a diverse background. And we're going to discuss what I think is an issue that is top of mind with every lawyer these days, and that is artificial intelligence. I am pleased to welcome Brian Beckcom, who not only is an extremely accomplished trial lawyer, he's also a computer scientist and a student of philosophy. Good afternoon, Brian, and welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Kevin. I'm really looking forward to the show. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Brian, you have a very interesting and diverse background. Not only are you an incredibly accomplished trial lawyer leading your firm, VB Attorneys, and your personal injury and maritime practice, where you have earned hundreds of millions of dollars for your clients, including representing the sailors of the Maersk, Alabama, a court case that was made very famous by the Hollywood movie Captain Phillips, which starred Tom Hanks. You also authored multiple books, and you host the podcast Lesson in Leaders, where you feature military leaders, sports stars, New York Times bestselling authors, scientists, and more. Have I missed anything? Is there anything else that you do that the audience should be aware of?
I'm a dad to 3 kids. I'm a husband of 25 years, and I'm a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Those are the big ones you missed.
I'm a parent of 2 kids. I don't know if I would put the difficulty level in that above even a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, right.
They're both pretty challenging tasks to accomplish. So you have an interesting background where you've been just a great trial lawyer. You're a continual student of computer science and philosophy. I think your diverse background really lends itself to comment on this, could we call it a burgeoning world of artificial intelligence? But I mean, I know you've been pro-technology for a number of years, and you have a certain philosophy about where we're going. What are your general views on artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence is a very big category of that covers a lot of different things. So, for example, when I was studying computer science at Texas A&M in the early 1990s, I took an artificial intelligence class in the early 1990s. The comparison between what we knew then and how we did things back then and what we know now is not even in the same universe. In fact, I was watching a really good YouTube video last night about artificial intelligence, and one of the points that it made was the original artificial intelligence researchers tried to essentially use long chains of reasoning to create artificial intelligence. That was one way to do it. The other way to do it is through neural networks. Neural networks are the basic idea is that you have nodes or locations in the experts where the more positive signals you get in a particular node, the more likely that is to be answered. So it's kind of a self-learning artificial intelligence as opposed to a human being trying to predict ahead of time what the artificial intelligence is going to learn. And the reason that's so important, Kevin, the second one, the self-learning piece of it is with self-learning artificial intelligence, it can learn exponentially faster. And so there's, the more it learns, the better it gets, the more it learns. Those are complementary things, and it doesn't require human intervention in order to do that. I'll give you a really strange example of this, okay? So let's talk about large language models. That's a subset of artificial intelligence. Large language models are basically databases, programming languages that predict what the next token word, a piece of a word, a sentence will be. They recently were training a large language model to see if the large language model would act independently of the researchers. And the really curious thing about it was is the large language model at the very beginning tried to trick the researchers into believing it didn't know as much as it did so it could get more data. And the researchers have no idea. They didn't tell it to do that. That wasn't part of the program. That was self-learned, so to speak. So artificial, to me, the really interesting thing, or one of the most fascinating things to me about artificial intelligence is it puts front and center the most important and the most unanswered question in science right now, which is, and maybe in human history, which is, what is consciousness? What does it mean to be conscious? And what's the purpose of general consciousness? Artificial intelligence puts that question front and center. There are people right now that will say large language models have some consciousness. There are other people that will say, no, it's just bits and a screen. And, if we define consciousness as having an internal subjective experience, we don't think artificial intelligence has that. Of course, the question is, how do you know that? Like, that's one of the super duper tricky questions about consciousness and intelligence is, because consciousness by definition is a subjective experience, it's hard to know if another agent is having a subjective experience. So for example, the only thing I can be really sure of right now is that I'm having a conscious experience, but I don't know what your experience is right now. I mean, for all I know, you could be a robot on the other side of the screen, right? I have no proof of your consciousness. So
Yeah.
the interesting thing about these artificial intelligence is they're, I don't want to say smart enough. They're at the point now where they can fool human beings. And some people mistake that for consciousness. And some people say, no, that's just a good computer program. So I think, especially in any field where the job is to manipulate information and data, artificial intelligence is going to have a huge, huge impact in the next 5-10 years.
That's a bit scary too, because what you're saying is it's not machine learning. And the fact that this program tried to trick the humans into believing that it knew less than it actually did in order to consume more data and become smarter. It's a little weird, right? Like,
Yeah,
doesn't
sure.
the machine really have a mind of its own? There was I think it was like a test by like German scientists many years ago. And it was something about if you get to the point where you're interfacing with somebody on like the other end and you can't tell if what is on the other end is actually human versus machine. I think you maybe mentioned that in one of your podcasts in the past.
Yeah. So you're talking about maybe one of the most famous tests in computer science, the Turing test. Alan Turing was a British mathematician during World War II. As an aside, he was also gay, and the British government after the war prosecuted him for being gay. He had there's a great movie, I forget the name of it. I think it's called Enigma or something like that. But in any event, Alan Turing was, some people would say, invented one of the first computers. There's other people that would say that computers, at least the concept of a computer, was long before that. But Alan Turing actually built a machine that decoded the Nazi Enigma code, a computer that did that. And he proved a bunch of really important things in math and computer science. One of his tests that he developed was called the Turing test. And the Turing test basically says, if there's, let's say you and I are having a conversation, but I can't see who you are on the other side of the screen. In other words, I don't know if you're a human or a robot. And I start interacting with you, and whatever's on the other side starts interacting with me, and I can't tell the difference whether it's human or not, then that passes the Turing test. And for all practical purposes, it's intelligent. It's a little more complicated than that on the mathematical level, but that's the basic layperson's definition of the Turing test. I would argue, at least for kind of the general Turing test, we passed that long ago. Like we're already at that point with a lot of these large language models. One of the interesting things to me, Kevin, is, I can tell when I read something most of the time whether it was written by an artificial intelligence. How? Because there's always like a little bit, there's either a word that's off or a little bit out of place or a little strange. What's going to happen to the young kids that don't have the long history of reading normal human writing like you and I do? Like, are they going to have the same instincts for these computer generated scripts that we do, or are they just not going to know the difference? And I'm a little bit concerned that the younger generation, because they're not going to have the experience of reading only human generated content, they're going to have the experience of reading only computer driven content, that they're not going to know the difference because they just don't have any baseline by which to judge it, if that makes any sense.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, and that's what kind of worries me about the future of AI. And I want to ask you, like, what worries you the most about this? And you've alluded to it right there. Could it be, as you were saying, the dumbing down of society? Because you put a query into Chat GPT, and I feel like sometimes the result that comes back, to your point, it has some intelligence, but doesn't have the emotional intelligence to do the right word selection. And you can tell if you've used it quite a bit, it was almost computer generated. So, I mean, are you concerned about the dumbing down of society? What just about like machine addiction? I mean, I can't get my teenagers to stop looking at their phone now. I mean, what's going to happen? Or what about, misinformation, disinformation? We just went through a political cycle and everything's misinformation, disinformation. Like, what do you see are some of the big concerns when, what if a news source or a certain country spits out 1 million fake stories in 2 seconds? Like, what do you think of the impacts it could have? But I think before that, I want to ask you to maybe also give an overview of, do you think AI in general is going to be more favorable, or the dangers will make it less favorable going forward?
I'm an optimist when it comes to technology in general. So I've always been optimistic about how technology will help us while recognizing the downsides. I'll give you a couple amazing examples how AI has helped me. So I've started retaking some calculus and computer programming courses just because I feel like I want to understand them on a deeper level than maybe I did 20 years ago. And so now when I'm taking a calculus class, I literally have my computer screen set up. I'm taking a class on the one side, and on this right next to it is my AI app. And if I get to something that I don't understand, I can ask it to explain it to me in a way that I actually understand it. And so I'm like, if I were back in school today, I could learn so much faster. It would knock your socks off. It's the same thing with like medical diagnosis. AIs are going to get better at AIs are already better at reading MRIs than radiologists are by far. They're going to get better at differential diagnosis and things like that very quickly too. Why? Because the human brain is limited in the amount of information it can take in. To use the example you just used, which I think is a good one. What if a country were to generate 1 million pieces of different disinformation in 2 seconds and blast it all over the place? That's not going to be super effective because human beings can't process that much information. The trickier thing is when you get, so what you're trying to do with disinformation or with any kind of information is you're trying to take concepts and you're trying to place it in people's brains. So like on this podcast, I have some ideas about AI and I'd like to put those in your mind, right? If I were to write in an AI, put down every single thing I've ever said or known about AI and showed it to you, it would take days for you to read that, process it, digest it, right? Because the input, there's a bandwidth problem. It's the same thing with doctors. Doctors go to medical school, they learn all of this medicine, they learn all these different diagnoses and diseases, but there's a limit to how much they can keep in their conscious mind. So their reference is not nearly as big as a medical AI would have. Medical AI is going to have every single piece of medical knowledge, not just that you've studied, but that every medical student in history has studied. And it's going to be able to access that, but it's not going to be able to dump that on a normal human brain in the way a computer would, because a human's not going to be able to comprehend it, if that makes sense. So
you can only digest what you can digest.
And this relates to the way we've been using AI in the law. So I can generate hundreds and hundreds of discovery requests in minutes now. I can summarize hundreds and hundreds of pages of discovery responses in minutes now. But if my team gives me 50 different summaries from 50 different cases, it's not like I can read all that any faster than I used to be able to. The speed at which I can read that remains the same. So people that use AI now are going to be It's going to be the same type of people, and they're going to have the same type of advantages as people that use computers early. There's a skill to using AIs. Like there's a way of prompting. Everybody has heard about the prompts and prompt engineering and stuff. When you understand kind of on a fundamental level how these LLM works, you understand why those prompts are so important, because what you're basically doing is you're writing little computer programs in English for the LLM to execute. You know, I was thinking about this last night. I was preparing a letter to the governor of Texas, very important letter about some very important legal issues going on in the state. And I said, I want you to write this letter. I want you to make it very, very persuasive. And I spit out this letter and I read it and I said, God, this sounds nothing like me. Like, this is not my voice at all. This is not what I wanted this to sound like. And so I literally sat there and rewrote it almost entirely by myself. And I was thinking, like, why did the LLM not produce a product that sounded like me that I liked? And it's because I have a certain intention in my mind of what I want the document to achieve and what I want it to look like. But I can't really express that intention. I can't get every single thing in my brain onto the computer screen. So the AIs have to guess at what you want a little bit. And that gap right there, I think, is a profound gap. Like, we have to understand that the AI is guessing what you want, is predicting what you want. It doesn't actually know what you want. Whereas with you and me, we might be sitting there at a bar drinking a beer, and I'll look at you and I'll notice your beer is almost empty. And I'll think to myself, Kevin didn't say this, but he probably needs another beer. Hey, you want another beer? An AI is not going to be able to predict your intentions quite as easily. Now, maybe at some point it can, but an AI can't read your mind. In some ways, humans have the ability to read each other's minds through physical cues, emotional cues, intonation cues, and the way your voice works, context cues, historical cues. There's a lot of soft, and this has always been that we used to have this thing in computer science called fuzzy logic.
Sure.
So you've heard of fuzzy logic. So logic is like, if A, then B, if B, then C, it's like real strict mathematical logic. We were trying back in the 90s to develop something called fuzzy logic that would deal with situations that were not quite so cut and dry. And that really hasn't worked. Fuzzy logic really hasn't worked. So we've gone to these, like I was talking about, these neural networks. But the point of it is, humans interact every single day with nonverbal cues and non-written cues. There are all sorts of cues that we trigger off of. And so far, at least, computers have been able to do that. Although I will say now we're getting to the point where we're able to generate videos and images that are almost so realistic that they can give off some of those emotional cues, right? They can, like the way your eyes move, the way your mouth moves. When you smile, like if I smile like my eyes wide open, that's super weird, right? Because when you smile for real, your eyes actually get smaller. And computers have started to figure that out. Like they've started to be able to mimic the way your face moves, the way your eyes squint, the way your mouth moves, things like that. And those are all equally important communication devices that humans use that computers have not gotten to yet. Maybe they will get to that point, but they're not there yet.
We've tested quite a few proprietary AI programs on the market, in addition to just some of the popular ones like ChatGPT. We have an internal IP director who wrote his own program designed for our business, and we've tested them out. And there are some that they claim will actually learn in your voice over time, or in the voice of the company and the business that you do. And they will become smarter as you go. So to your point, eventually it takes like your intention and the emotional cues and what you want to convey on the piece of paper. And it's supposed to learn around that. We've test driven some. We haven't really invested in any because we feel like nothing really does capture the human intention like better than the human. And so we could at least just use a ChatGPT as a start, and then we'll keep testing them as they go. But I mean, there's a ton of these proprietary programs on the market. Let's focus a little bit on the practice of law. I mean, how are you using AI? in your practice, are you using Chat GPT? Have you built your own program? Have you invested in proprietary programs? You had mentioned discovery. Like, what have you explored and where are you using it for?
Yeah, so I've used most of the major LLMs that are out: Claude, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Google Notebook, Gemini. I'm kind of using all of them right now, and I'm using them on the pro mode because I want to kind of test the strengths and weaknesses of the different AIs. Well, I'll tell you that in terms of like just normal day-to-day stuff, like when we want to generate discovery questions, so most of your listeners will know when you're in a trial, you can ask written questions and the other side has to answer them. And we used to write up all those questions ourselves. Now the AI can generate 90% of that in about 5 minutes. And now we have to have a human look over them and make sure they're appropriate, make sure that there's not a hallucination in there or something like that. But that is all of a sudden super duper quick. When I take a deposition by Zoom now, when I'm done, I have the transcript already ready and there's an executive summary that the AI has written, including any follow-ups or tasks that I might want to pay attention to. That is a huge, huge time saver. I use AIs to write briefs. So for example, a couple of months ago, what I've lately started to do with my legal briefs is I like to have a little quote at the top that kind of encapsulates the idea behind my brief. So I had this brief where the other side, somebody had gotten hurt and the other side hadn't investigated. And I was trying to say the fact that they didn't investigate was tantamount to getting rid of evidence. I said, hey, I need 5 quotes that encapsulate this idea from literature. And it spit out 5 amazing quotes. And I ended up pulling a Salman Rushdie quote as my pullout quote. So it's great for generating ideas. I've also taken some of the biggest verdicts in the United States over the last 10, 15 years. I've found the opening statements and the closing statements given by the plaintiff's lawyers. I've run those through AI. I've had them analyze it. I've had them compare it. Again, I actually have an AI now that I've trained on an opening statement template for me that can now generate for me an opening statement in 1 minute. Now I got to go in there and play around with it. Here's another way I'm using AI. I write a monthly newsletter. I've written that for about 10 years. I took every single article that I wrote, put it into a PDF, loaded it into ChatGPT. I said, I want you to read every single one of these articles. This is the way I write. This is what I'm doing this for. And I want you to write an article for January through December of 2025 for me. And I want you to do it in the same style and the same tone that I wrote 10 years of these things. And it kicked out 12 amazingly good newsletter articles. I have to change them just a little bit, but those are the kind of things that I'm using AI for. The other thing that I've noticed is I don't use Google really anymore at all. Like search engines, as we've understood them historically, are dead. Every single time I want to search for something now, I just pull up my ChatGPT app. Hey, how do you make a great old fashioned? Last night I was like, hey, what's a good recipe for garlic bread? Hey, here's a picture. Can you tell me what this watch is? Will you do a summary of the Texas public information? I'm not going to Google anymore. Google is now using its own AI in some of the search results, but I think ChatGPT and Perplexity are frankly better, at least the way the information is presented. So my entire practice is immersed in AI right now. And I think, but again, the thing is like, I can send 300 discovery requests and get 300 discovery answers back, and I can summarize it with an AI, but some human brain still has to read and process that data and then decide what to do with it. And again, it's not the output. The output's essentially unlimited. It's the input. And you asked earlier what I think and what a really important skill going forward is. I think one of the most important skills people can develop going forward, old people, young people, everybody in between, is being able to tell the signal from the noise. Because just like our food supply, we don't have a problem with scarcity in our food supply anymore. We have a problem with too much food. That's why everybody's so fat, right? It's the same thing with information. We don't have a problem with scarcity. We have too much information. And the idea, just like the food, the trick is to pick out what's good for you and what's garbage. It's the same exact concept with information, being able to figure out what to pay attention to, what's important, and what's garbage, which 99% of stuff out there is garbage. That's the skill. Like, and what are you really doing there fundamentally? The most important decision everybody makes, you, me, everybody makes on a daily basis is, what am I going to pay attention to? Right? You could take your attention, which is your most valuable resource, and pay attention to 10,000 things. Right now, you could be looking at your text messages. You could be looking at me. You could be looking at other things. We get off the phone, you can go to Instagram, you can play some video game, or you can do some work. And deciding what you're going to focus your attention on, especially nowadays when we've got literally everything is constantly vying for our attention. So again, the uses of AI in the legal field are incredible. I mean, imagine if you're a young lawyer right now and you can have an AI write an opening statement based on something that Johnny Cochran and all the other great lawyers did. I mean, now all of a sudden you're kind of on an equal playing field a little bit, at least in terms of the words you can generate, right? I mean, you still got to present that, which is a different skill, but you're 90% of the way there when you have the words on paper and you can read. So it's also a leveler. It like kind of levels the playing field for everybody quite a bit.
Yeah, especially I think if you're a younger lawyer or you work for a small firm.
Yeah,
I mean, you basically have unlimited resources at your fingertips. But it's something you said, like it takes a younger lawyer, puts them on an equal playing field. So, there's been articles written, a lot of conversation about, AI. Will AI actually replace lawyers? Like, will it replace lawyers, or will it replace commoditized work? Will it replace some practice areas? Will it replace some legal staff, or will it augment and enhance the human side of things, the critical thinking, the tasks that require complex reasoning? What are your thoughts on how it will impact the size of the pool of talent in the legal marketplace?
That's a great question, and I guess my answer is it depends. It depends on which direction we go with AI, like whether AI becomes deeply embedded in the law, which I think it will, or whether it doesn't. If it becomes deeply embedded in the law, then the only thing I can predict for sure is that the legal profession won't look like it does now. I don't know if there'll be more lawyers or less lawyers. I don't know if there'll be more older lawyers, more bigger firms, more smaller firms. I just know it's going to look radically different. I mean, you probably are old enough to, I'm old enough to remember where I would wake up in the morning, get in a little box, i.e. my car. I would drive down a highway in traffic. I would get in a building, go up to the 50th floor to sit in another box for 8 hours and stare at another box on my desk. And then I would repeat the process in reverse and go home. There used to be mail rooms, and there used to be copy centers, and there used to, you know what I mean? All stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be a joke, when I used to work at a firm called Fulbright and Jaworski. When I first started out, we had hundreds of lawyers, but the only guys that were any good at basketball were me and the guys in the mailroom. And so I would just go down and we would get all the guys in the mailroom and just dominate the lawyer intramural leagues. And now I wonder where all my mailroom guys
Oh, right.
It's just not nearly as necessary. I was talking to a big corporate lawyer a couple of days ago. He said, "Oh yeah, we're expanding the space on our floor for our accounting department." And I said, let me ask you a question. Like, why do you have any space for your accounting department? Like, why don't your bean counters just sit at home and tap away on their computers and then give you that stuff? Like, yeah, that seems like a waste of money. And he goes, "You know what? That's a great question. My firm is great at making money or making revenue, but not so good at actually making a profit." And so a lot of these business models and ways of doing things that we've always done it, we're still doing it that way. And there are people that just aren't ever going to change. They're just not, why did you go back 2 days after quarantine ended and get everybody back in the office when everybody was 10 times more productive and 20 times more happy? That's the way we've always done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way we've always done it.
Well, it's hard to get lawyers to change their ways. Is probably one of the more lockstep, stubborn professions out there. But we did see a big change after COVID, and with working from home, and now I guess some firms are requiring people to go back a few days a week. But One of the things I think, tell me if you agree with this, is that the reason AI will never fully replace lawyers is from the client perspective and courtroom advocacy. You're never going to have a robot go to court and deliver an argument to a judge and a jury, because to your point, you have to know the law and know the facts. And there was a lot of physical interaction with intonation and the sound of your voice and everything, and diction and everything else. But also, I don't think clients are ever really going to want to give up a one-on-one interaction with an attorney. And they're going to always want to see the attorney in person and know like there's like a human client relationship there. So
I read something not too long ago that, what the number one profession they said would be insulated from the effects of AI, at least in the near future: nursing. Which makes total sense when you think about it. Like a nurse, the whole point of like a really good nurse is like this human emotional connection to the patient to make them, feel
the bedside manner.
Even at the bedside, the bedside manner.
Yeah.
And lawyers, like, one of the geniuses of our trial system, our litigation system, is you put a human being on that witness stand, and that human being gives testimony, and then I get to test it with cross-examination. And sometimes you could read the transcript of a cross-examination and say, well, I don't get it. But when I asked that one question to that witness, and he looked over to his lawyer, and then he looked over at the judge, and then he got a little sweaty and then answered,
you got him.
That's a
tell.
Totally different dynamic. Yeah.
Right.
And, we will get make no mistake about it, we will get to the point where you can put like a image of a human on a screen on the witness stand, and they can do all those things that are human-like. But without an actual human being sitting there with 12 human beings sitting right across looking at them, it's just not the same. And we all know, like, there's a difference between a witness saying, I didn't run that red light, and the witness saying, I didn't run that red light. Like, that has different meanings to people.
Sure.
The same exact word said in a different way with a different intonation. And so, but again, there's a lot of things that we have thought these are uniquely human characteristics. Like the ability to create a painting is a unique. No, it's not. AIs are creating paintings right now. They're just as good as anything that humans are creating. The ability to tell a joke, like ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, I said, write this brief in the way Seinfeld would write it. And it was hilarious. So there's some things that I think are uniquely human, but not many. There's not many.
Yeah, it is unique. One of my colleagues was using a program, I think it was just a Google program, and it was composing an interview where you could pose a question. Like you're asking like two different like sports reporters and news commentators about it. And there's like a male and a female, and it produced a 20-minute interview going back and forth. And the inflection and the tone of voice, if you played it, it goes back to that, that theory from like Germany from many years ago. You almost couldn't tell that it was artificially AI that generated it. It almost really sounded, the tone of voice, everything. It was pretty wild.
That's Google Notebook. You're talking about Google Notebook, and I've done that.
Good.
So yeah, everybody that's listening to this should try this out. So take some sort of document about some topic, put it in the Google Notebook, and ask it to generate a 10-minute podcast, and then listen to that podcast. I did that a couple of months ago. I sent this podcast to a bunch of friends, and they were like, God, that's an amazing podcast. Like, I can't believe they're talking about that. Nobody knew the damn difference. And yeah, that's the reason I did it. I wanted to see if anybody could tell, and nobody could. I mean, it is really, really good. And you're right. The way Google's programmed this, they have a female voice and a male voice and a female. Well, Todd, what do you think about this? Like, I mean,
pauses and
to the pauses and everything. Yeah, it's really, really, really good. But again, I want to remind you, Kevin, and also your listeners, The problem is not creating this kind of content. We have the ability to create unlimited content. Now, the problem is getting people to pay attention to it, number one, and then digesting all of it. So
Yeah.
I think that's the real skill that needs to be, that we need to focus on.
What about regulating it so we get the good, we get the ability to practice law more efficiently and handle discovery and spend more time doing human lawyerly critical thinking? What about the benefits of diagnosis in the medical profession, assisting somebody with advancing their education or helping them almost as if like a self-tutor, instead of misinformation, disinformation, creating fake citations and briefs, plagiarizing your term paper? I mean, should it be regulated so that we get the positive from AA and not the negative? How would you start? How would you regulate that?
Philosophically, I do not believe that regulation in general is perfect. And that's because I think it's impossible to predict the future. Basically, what regulations do is they try to predict what will happen in the future, and they try to account for that. And I don't think that's possible. And not only that, from a practical matter, our regulators, i.e. our politicians, move so slowly, and that process is so slow that by the time that they've come up with a law, the technology has already changed. Microsoft is a great example. Microsoft had a monopoly on the Windows operating system, and everybody knew it. And Bill Gates and that team made up these nonsense excuses about innovation. They literally stole the concept of the desktop from IBM and Microsoft. They didn't innovate that. They basically just ripped it off. But the point is everybody knew they had a monopoly. They got sued by the federal government. They got convicted of having a monopoly. Part of them got broken up. But by that time, we got Google, Apple's made a rebound. Facebook is, by the time that this trial was over with, everything had already passed them by. So the problem with regulating anything in AI in particular is AI moves so fast and regulation moves so slow, number one. And number two, it's really, really hard to predict and anticipate where we have potential dangers with AI. So for example, let's say Russia's building AI that'll control a team of 50 drones. And they're autonomous drones. In other words, there's no human telling them what to do. You give them a mission and then they just go figure out how to do it. And we say, well, that's dangerous. There should be a human component to that. Well, how are we going to stop them from doing that? Well, we're not, is the answer to that question. Same with China, same with these other countries. They're going to do what they want to do. And so as much as I would like to have some safeguards, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he has a funny answer to this. Well, what happens if an AI gets out of control? He says, I'll just unplug it. That's a pretty simplistic view, but the point, it's true. But the problem is that what if the AI is insinuated itself into other systems that you don't know about? And it's kind of already escaped. It's wherever it's contained. Yeah. So I just don't know how, given the practical problems and the slowness with which we regulate things, plus the prediction problem, I just don't know how you do it in practice. And so to me, what does that mean? What that means is it's more of an evolutionary thing where you just kind of let things develop, and the better things, the stronger, not better things, but the things that adapt better to the environment continue, and the things that don't. I don't really know any other answer to that question. What you're also going to have, if you believe what we're talking about now, you're going to have AIs fighting other AIs. So you're going to have AIs that are going to be like, you're going to have the American military AI saying, I'm way smarter than I know more than this other guy. I'm going to try to trick him, or I'm going to try to unplug him, or I'm going to try to plant a little bug in the system. So you're going to have AI warfare, and us humans are going to be sitting there driving down the road, not knowing World War III is happening already, but it's happening on computer screens.
That is really, that's a great thought. It's a little bit scary, but no, that's very insightful. So this is such an interesting conversation, Brian. We could probably keep going on all day, but any just final comments on where you think this could be going?
The only thing I'll say is that I don't try to predict the future anymore. I can't guess what the future is going to look like, but I'm excited about it. I mean, people are like, no, AI is going to displace a lot of jobs. Well, quite frankly, there's a lot of jobs that suck. And like, do we want to make people work in jobs that aren't fulfilling to them? Like if somebody's working at a job that they don't like and they don't have very much time to spend with their family or pursue other things. I mean, is that good or is that bad? I would argue that some of these jobs need to be automated. It'll be better for humans. And are we going to have to find other things for people to do? Of course we are. But I mean, that's been true since human history. Like we invented the car. I mean, everybody's like, well, what are all the buggy whip makers going to do? What are all the chariot makers going to do? Oh, we got guns now. Well, now swords aren't going to. So right. Yeah. So what? So it creates new jobs. I'm an optimist about the future. I actually believe the same thing that physicist David Deutsch has written, that there will always be problems and problems will always be solvable. And that second part of it, I think, is the really important part.
I think that's it's a great quote, and that's a great way to end the program. Thanks again for joining, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Very well received by the audience. I have people might want to discuss this a little bit more, especially with a lot of the programs you're currently using and how you're leveraging them in your practice. If people who are listening to this program would like to get a hold of you, what's a good way to reach you? Your email, direct dial, LinkedIn handle?
So I spend a lot of time on Instagram, Brian Beckcom Lawyer. My website is VB Attorneys, V as in Victor, B as in Brian, VBattorneys.com. I'm on all the social media. You can also find my podcast at brianbeckcom.org.
That's terrific. Thanks again. And as always, I want to thank the audience for listening. If you'd like to listen to other episodes of the Alternative Litigation Strategies podcast, you can go to our website at certumgroup.com. I'm also on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and 10 other of the most popular podcast outlets. If you want to get a hold of me personally, my email is kevins@certumgroup.com. Brian, thank you one more time.
Thank you, Kevin.
The audience, and until next time.